My name is Brian Gravel. I'm an associate professor of STEM education at Tufts University. And a lot of what drives my work is a big overarching question. I'm really curious, what kinds of learning is possible when we expand the ways that people can express and work with their ideas? So a lot of this stems from my own upbringing and history, sort of being a curious, materials-focused individual in the world. I always found stuff interesting. You can probably see the stuff behind me. I might borderline on hoarding at times, but I find materials and our interactions with materials to be really, really interesting. And throughout my career, I've sort of been curious what happens if we think about schooling as a space not of limits and conformity, but a space of possibilities where young people have boundless amounts of creativity, amounts of care, amounts of curiosity. And our job as educators is to really think about how we are expanding the space of schooling so that those possibilities can become realities for young people. So I'll sort of talk about that in a couple of different ways. One of the ways that I think is really important to pay attention to. This is a quote from a dear sort of mentor, even though I've only met her once, but I've loved her work so much. Jean Bamberger. She was at MIT for a long time and at Berkeley for some time. She wrote a book chapter in the 80s called The Laboratory for Making Things. And in that, she said, and I'm paraphrasing now, that just about every teacher you talk to knows of a student for whom, when the Legos or the blocks or the pens and papers come out, a new sort of brilliance emerges. And she asked us to really think carefully about how school privileges particular kinds of languages like reading and writing. If you are gifted with speaking, if you are gifted with writing, you shine in school because school is built for you. School is built to support that way of expressing yourself. But if you're a kid who expresses themselves through the ingenuity of popsicle sticks and Lego bricks and some glue, then school isn't always going to provide you the opportunities for your brilliance to be shown. So those are some of my core sort of commitments as an educator. And I went on to teach after, I did an undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering because, people who like to make things become engineers. I did a master's degree in engineering because I got to make more stuff. And that was sort of how I was developing my identity and my scholarly curiosity. But then I went on to teach fifth grade, and it was in teaching elementary school that I really glued or sort of hooked onto this idea that, my goodness, we are limiting the possibilities for learning by not providing tools and opportunities for young people to explore their curiosities. So in teaching fifth grade, I was teaching in Massachusetts when engineering was a very new part of the curriculum. So the state said you needed to teach engineering in elementary schools, and very few people knew how to do it. And so we were exploring this and sort of building our thinking as we went along. And I'm very grateful to those 11 and 12-year-olds because in some ways they taught me as much about learning as I am now trying to study in my own program of scholarship. So at the core of all of the work that I do is sort of this belief that if we expand the ways learners can express themselves, we can learn more about what they know, we can learn more about learning, and hopefully, at the end of the day, we can improve the experiences of schooling such that they are more humanizing, more equitable, more just. These are important terms to me, not just in the sense of needing to build a just society, but making sure that when a kid goes into a school, and in the US anyway, we ask kids to commit about 13 years of their life to this. Dan Lordy very famously said we spend 13,500 hours as a student in our lives. There's a lot of time. So when we ask young people to commit to that, it should be valuable. It should be affirming. It should be something that you're excited about and something that makes sense to you and something where you feel like you can build the world in a way that you'd like to build it. So what I do is I build tools like stop motion animation software, simulation software. I work with schools to build things like spaces, making spaces, maker spaces, sort of these multi-material, multi-tool, multidisciplinary kinds of spaces. And we use these tools and these spaces to explore this central question of what's possible when we expand the range of what students know how to do with the stuff in front of them. So I'll use play as an example because I think that one of the insights I've gained over time is that these spaces, if you've ever been to a school and been to sort of an art studio or a maker space or a wood shop kind of venue, you see people having a kind of fun that's sadly missing from a lot of classroom spaces these days, especially in the era of accountability and sort of conformity, where classrooms are being asked to do the same thing, in some cases, every minute of every day throughout the 180 days of their school year. You go into these spaces that are more like studios or shops, and you see a kind of play emerging. And so play has been a really powerful idea to me because it helps me see what is going on when someone is picking up a material that they're unfamiliar with and messing about with it, or when they're taking a saw to a piece of wood for the first time and trying to figure out how it works, or they're messing with an LED and a little button battery and some wires, and it's not making sense to them, but all of a sudden the LED lights and they're sort of hooked with curiosity in that moment. What is going on in that space of play, I think, is essentially, and I borrow this gratefully from Jerome Bruner, play allows us to do two really central things. It allows us to take risks with our thinking and with what we know how to do, and it allows us to reconfigure the world in a way that we see as important or interesting, right? So when you look at really young children, they're not bound by the cultural and sort of norms, cultural rules and norms of the world they grew up in. They're very much still learning them. So they're willing to break the rules and reconfigure the world to be however they want it to be. The classic example is if a kid wants to pretend they can fly, they can pretend they can fly. Nothing's really stopping them, right? They have that possibility and that imagination in them. So that idea that you can take risks and reconfigure the world, and that's what play is, allows us to look at activities like building animation, stop motion animations, building things out of wood, or laser cutting things, or 3D printing things, or doing all of these fun sort of multi-material engagements. They can reconfigure the world to be the way they want it to be. And I think that ultimately that is what a good education is about. It's about providing opportunities for young people to create connections and relationships to each other, to imagine a world that they want to live in. Because, right, if we think about the 10th grader, the 12th grader, we think about this a lot at Tufts in the college classroom. A college engineering student is essentially going to be the one that determines what engineers will do and care about in the future. So we should be listening to what's important to them, to the ways that they think about care for communities, about equity, about justice. I'll share a quick story of a project we did in one of our dearest partner districts, Malden, right here in Massachusetts. It's a very racially and economically and linguistically diverse community. Tends to be a really fascinating, powerful place to work. So we devised a program. This is with my close colleague and collaborator, Eli Tucker-Raymond at Boston University, and Maria Olivares. We worked on trying to understand what happens if teachers think about play with materials alongside their students as learners themselves. So what happens when we have teachers being co-learners with students in these spaces with lots of materials and technology? So we came at this with play as a really guiding feature. And then our other collaborator, Aman Milner at Olin College of Engineering, a really, truly brilliant individual, really helped us to think about computation as a tool to make sense of the world in front of us. So we developed this program on computational making, and we asked teachers and students to get together to think about issues in their community that they wanted to solve by making something. So these three young people, as two boys and a girl, we're talking about how in the parks in Malden, they're always being asked to do, sort of, what did they say? The adults don't want us to get in trouble. So they want us to be productive, and they kept putting it in quotes because they thought it was funny how the adults sort of frame their existence. They're like, look, we're kids. We want to go to the park and have a good time. We want to be outside. We want to be exercising. But when you look at the parks, the state of them is sad. A lot of the basketball hoops don't work. The nets are missing, or the rims are missing. They don't have the equipment they'd like to play with. Essentially, they said, what if our parks were a place where you could just go and show up, and there'd be a locker there full of sports equipment that you could borrow and play with your friends? So that was the premise of their idea. We can transform these parks by thinking about installing these like kiosks of sports equipment to encourage us doing good things, good for our bodies, good for our minds, good for our communities, good for our souls. So they built this thing they called ParkUplay. And what it is a device where you would walk up with your phone, and they mocked all of this up, prototyped all of this with simple, microprocessing technology. You would walk up to this device with your phone, And you would say, I have my phone right here. So you would say, I'm at Dever Park and I'd like to borrow a basketball. And it would send me a code. I'd type a code into my phone, the door would open, and there's a basketball. What it also did, and this was the brilliance of the young people being given an opportunity to explore the future they want, is as I borrowed that basketball, it blasted out to all my friends that I'm at Dever Park playing basketball. So all my friends collapse on the park, and there I have my network, my community present, playing basketball, engaging with each other. It also did this thing of, if I didn't put the basketball back, all my friends knew the last time we saw the basketball was when Brian had it at Dever Park. So they built this idea of a system that would allow them to exercise, allow them to be, sort of enjoying their time in a park. It would connect them to their friends. It had a sort of mechanism of social accountability in it. And they did it together with their teachers. They engaged in design work, laser cutting, fabrication. They did a really complex computational sort of system to simulate the cell phone exchange. They did all this brilliant stuff. And what's so cool about it is they presented it at the end of this week. The mayor came, the mayor of the city thought this was such an amazing idea. The teachers thought it was great. And then COVID happened and we kind of couldn't do anything with it. Lo and behold, about a month ago, one of my graduate students is walking through a park in Cambridge and he sends me a picture of exactly that device, exactly Park You Play. It's not called that. Some other company came up with it in one of the parks in Cambridge. And the whole mission is encouraging people to get outside and exercising. So I tell this story because I think there's something about the trust and faith we put in young people to imagine a future of interacting in public spaces that then the world sort of produced 3 or 4 years later as evidence for we should listen to these young people. We should provide them these opportunities to be engaging with materials, to engage with questions they have about the world, to engage in their own social realities as agents, as people who can affect some change in that world and imagine the world with a new set of possibilities. So at the end of the day, a lot of my scholarship is sort of organized around doing work in the community with schools and teachers, exploring materials and tools and new kinds of arrangements for how people learn together to help get at this central issue of, if we give people a different way to express their ideas and work with them, we get to see the possibilities that exist within all of our communities.